stand up, be that voice of quality, be the guy that's the gatekeeper for making sure, or girl that's making sure that if it's not good enough, you say it's not good enough, and then stand by that.
Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today I'm joined by Jon Robinson. Jon is the head of sales at Test Sigma. Jon goes into his career on QA and how he got started, as well as his thoughts on roles, process, and test automation. Today is part one of the conversation, with part two releasing in the next couple weeks. So without any further ado, Jon Robinson. Jon, thanks for joining me.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me.
Cool. So I always start off asking, how'd you get into QA? It's always an interesting story from everyone that I talk to. So what got you into this industry?
Mine is accident. I had been in the general IT space for 10, 11 years. I fell into it out of high school where I just liked computers. And at the time, Windows 95 was coming out, and nobody in the organization I was interning at knew anything about it. And what was supposed to be a part-time gig turned into a full-time gig, turned into 11 years. And I realized at the end of it, I hated computers, and I was done with this reactive, just stressful ball every single day of it. And so I basically went on, sabbatical for 3 months, went and pushed a broom on a construction site in LA for the new UCLA Medical Center out there. My brother was working as a project manager, and went out there and had no clue what I wanted to do. I would just kind of, banging my head against the wall, because I liked computers in general, but I didn't like the always on fire aspect of IT at that point in time. And I came back, and a guy in my church is like, "Hey, we've got this consulting company, and we do this thing called performance testing. Would that be of any interest to you? We need people. We've got a lot of projects and nobody to actually staff them." And I knew nothing about QA at this point, absolutely diddly squat. That was 18 years ago. And started off doing that for a couple years, and then realized, oh, holy crap, this is actually kind of my sweet spot. I like breaking things. I'm good at this thing. I'm going to do this for a while. And like I said, 18 years later, and here I am.
I mean, I've never talked to someone yet who's been like, at the age of 8, I decided I wanted to become a QA engineer.
Yeah, I mean, we were just talking about this earlier, but there isn't a career path into it. There's a lot of people that don't know that this is a viable career track. It'd be nice if there was actually a career track for it where people could actually be prepared to it coming into the workforce. But there isn't something where in 8 years, the closest we get is my kids all want to be in QA because of what I do, not because there's this thing that they can go to school for to do it, but they see what I get to do and they're like, "Oh, I want to do that too." I'm like, that's awesome. I love that I'm having that impact on you, but just know that it's not like an overnight, you just jump right into it. There's a lot of stuff that you just have to experience. And that's what makes good QA people for me is, what are your experiences in life up to this point that actually got you here?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this a little bit before, right? But my big belief when it comes to QA is that critical thinking, analytical ability, and emotional intelligence are really your foundational components. And you can teach people the terminology and methodology components.
Absolutely. The technical side of it, that's the easy part.
But
that part, not worried.
But what's weird about it too is it's almost like, sales in a weird way. There's some parallels, right? Where anyone can do sales. In an odd way, a lot of organizations kind of treat it like anyone can do QA. Like, oh, we'll just throw a customer service person into it. And then like in sales, a lot of people wash out after 6 to 12 months because the reality is not everyone can do sales. You sort of see something similar where people tend to wash out a lot on the QA, sometimes not necessarily because they're not the right fit, but because it's not a job that just anyone can be dropped into and have success with. It's actually remarkably complex.
It is remarkably complex. And what is really funny about that is, it used to be a running joke for a long time in a lot of the places that I worked that most of the existing QA people that were there, not necessarily folks that I had hired, but people that had just kind of appeared in QA, were by and large considered failures in other areas of the organization. And it was kind of a dumping ground for people that didn't know where else to go, because they still loved technology and they still wanted to do this thing and they still wanted a job, And the business didn't, they're like, you're not a good enough developer. You're not a good enough project manager. You're not a good enough product person. You're not a good enough whatever to do that. But hey, this QA thing over here, we need somebody to actually do testing for us. You'd be a good QA for us because you know the product, you understand the technical aspects of it. And those things are good, valuable things. But the perception was it was staffed by a lot of failures. And that led to the way the organization saw them and their ability to add value was they didn't see the value add part of it. They saw it's the people that staffing it and where they came from that they weren't good enough in these other areas. How much do we really trust them in that way? And it was frustrating.
So then let's say that you're listening to this, right? And you're one of these people where you believe you can be providing a lot of value to the organization in this QA position, but you resonate with what you just said and you're like, wait a second, I think that I am sort of treated this way. How does that person go about becoming more effective or making change or empowering themselves to be more respected in the organization?
I think leaning in and owning it is the first, like the mindset of just taking ownership of your career. I mean, the number one thing that I struggle with new people when I go into organizations or work with is how often they're prepared to hand off the definition of what their career goals, paths, objectives, etc. should be to other people to define for them. And the biggest thing you can do is take ownership of that yourself. And if you really think you've got value add to give, well, show us. They take ownership of that and start acting like that rather than being the fly on the wall and just along for the ride. Have a voice. Stand up. Be that voice of quality. Be the guy that's the gatekeeper for making sure, or girl that's making sure that if it's not good enough, you say it's not good enough. And then stand by that.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because one of the conversations I was just having with someone on my team a couple of days ago is that I really do have a deep respect for engineers' desire to learn. Like software development as an industry, like, every time you join a new company, you're learning new frameworks, you're learning new languages, you're learning new tool sets. And it's something that if you're sort of new to this space, the accepted sort of mindset of you might not know it today, but if you teach yourself it, it can become valuable. I think that that's really intimidating, even for someone who's like a customer service person who's joining something like QA, right?
Yeah.
This idea of like, well, I don't know that framework. I've never done JavaScript before. I've never done something like automation or Playwright. And I've met, a stunning number of software engineers who have taught themselves new languages in the evenings, who have taught themselves these new sets of skills. And QA is this world where it has a foot in both, right? It has a foot in your code heavy, and then it has a foot in your process heavy. And someone who's just coming from that process side, I think it can be kind of eye-opening to realize like that developer that you think is a genius probably taught themselves a decent amount of this stuff when they joined the company. Yeah. Like they're not always bringing in this memorized set of components. And it was interesting watching some light bulbs go off, I guess. If you want to riff off that, I'm curious your thoughts.
No, it's funny because I had one of the best employees from that standpoint and just hungry for learning. It's super interesting story. So when I was at Home Advisor, we had an internship program with Denver Public Schools. And we basically would bring in over a course of 3 years we called it an internship, but it was really a tradecraft program where you'd come in and learn the trade and, slowly replace your days in school with days at the office, learning how to do this thing. And we had a girl that came in. She was a senior at the time, so she was late in the program, didn't get to go through the whole thing, but incredibly smart, where everybody else was coming in and putting their 3-4 hours a day in, and doing the tasks they were assigned. I mean, typical what you would expect from a high school kid. This girl was from illegal immigrant parents and was one of the top 5 students in the state of Colorado, but couldn't be officially recognized as such because of her status. No idea what a white collar job, office type job even remotely entailed, because that wasn't something that she'd ever been exposed to, no understanding of what that was. She came in and a couple weeks in was like in tears one day. She had stayed late. She was working on something. She didn't have to do it. She had just been given a project and she wanted to do it. She loved to see what the options that were there were. And she's like, the cleaning people came through and she was crying because she's like, if I hadn't done this program, that would have been me. Like I would have not known that this was even an option. I would have been one of the cleaning crew that was coming through here after hours cleaning this place up. And we got to the end of the program. She was about to graduate. And I went to my boss and said, look, we should try and hire her. Like we should keep her on after this program is over. You know, she's learned in the course of a just literally 3 months of time. She went from having no idea what technology was to being one of our better actual QA people. Like her ability to understand and look at the problem and solve the problem, tremendous. It was off the charts. And I watched her over the course of that come in, and in 6 months time from when she started, like she had graduated high school. She was preparing over the summer for going to college. Like she was becoming a vibe. She had taught herself how to do automation. So went from nothing. Now she's doing automation. And then we finally lost her when she's like, I got to go to school. Like, I'm like, she asked me like, should I do this? What should I do? Cause I really like this. Should I stay here? We were willing to keep her and help pay for school. Like I would have loved that. I'm like, no, you've got an opportunity. Go do that other thing. And now she's a security engineer. Like she does security and she's stupid smart.
That's awesome.
But it was something that she would have never, like she taught herself. She figured it out once she was exposed to it and saw what the possibilities were. She had no idea what they were. And it was awesome. It was the most rewarding thing I've ever had in my career.
What's your perspective on all these boot camps? I want to sort of look at the education state, right? Because you and I, before this, right, we talked, there's very little stateside feeder system. I think internationally there's a lot more feeder systems into QA, but there's no 4-year degrees as far as I've ever found. I've never found an associate's degree for QA. You ask anyone who's gotten a CS degree and they've never even had a course on QA. So what is prevalent or more prevalent is these kind of 12-week boot camps that promise a QA job at the end. And I think that there's a couple good examples, and then there's a lot of examples, I think, of people taking people's money and maybe the outcome's not always there. And I'm curious of your thoughts, because one way or the other, and transparently, I don't have any direct personal experience. This is just kind of hearing from third parties.
Yeah. I've worked with a couple of them. We've hired some people. You've got the ones that focus explicitly on QA, and you've got the ones that are more general technology. And so there's a little bit of QA, there's a little bit of development, there's a little bit of product, there's a little bit of getting you into the space. Specifically around QA, I think it largely depends on the organization that you get into and whether they have a really strong grasp of the strategic value of QA and how to position you there. Because as we've talked about, the technical aspects of it are actually quite straightforward. There's not a lot of complexity to it until you get into some of the more advanced automation, where you're talking about doing more development type of initiatives. But general QA, the testing efforts, by and large, are fairly straightforward. What isn't as straightforward is when do you test? Where do you test? Why do you test? How often do you test? What should you be testing? Those things are the things that are often the things that aren't taught very well. And so if you get in with somebody that actually does a good job of explaining that, I think you have a much better chance in the long run of them being useful and successful. If you don't, I mean, right now there are so many, especially in today's economy, there's so many people that are out there from a QA standpoint. I've seen jobs where just a regular job a couple years ago that you might have been 20, 30 competing applicants for that same job are now 1,400 applicants for the same job. And that's like, how do you make yourself stand out in that noise? Yeah. And one of the ways is actually understanding QA and the value that it brings. Yeah,
it's interesting, right? To continue down that path for a second. One of the things I've heard from a lot of developers is you don't learn how to develop to your first job. Like they all say, like, we took our 4-year career, or degree. It was fine, but where we learned to develop was our first job, like where you learn what real development is. And I think that you and I also were talking about this a little bit beforehand is, I think there's a huge difference between theory of QA and pragmatic sort of realities of QA.
Yeah.
I think that oftentimes what you read about in theory is not the realities that people are faced in, whether there's no unit tests or whether there's no access to a database or whether the acceptance criteria is almost nothing, like, or lack of process or all these different things, right? And I think that to your point, that's really hard to get in 12 weeks. And what's almost even harder is to instill the confidence to have someone to speak up, to make the change, to like, hey, we should do this, right? So,
the voice is hard.
Yeah, right. And to say, okay, hey, you're going to do this 12-week boot camp, you're going to do like an internship or something like that, then you're going to join this company that's not going to probably put you in a great position to succeed, and you have to then create success. It's a hard thing to do. I mean, I've talked to a couple of people who are great coming out of it, but sorry, go ahead.
I mean, you're nailing it, because if you look at it, we mentioned this earlier too, like the reality of every organization, no two organizations are the same. I don't care how closely you align them. The people are going to be different. The processes are going to be different. The teams are going to be different. The goals and objectives are going to be different. Every single organization. I've yet to go into this to two that were even remotely close to each other. So you go through a 12-week boot camp and they teach you this one way, right? They could give you a really good educational overview of that. But I guarantee you it is not going to line up with any organization that you go into. So if they're not teaching you the critical thinking and the how do you like dissect this thing and actually do it and understand the pieces that involve with making these decisions, and how to look at this from the big picture and what are the factors that need to be considered. If you're not learning that, then you're going to struggle wherever you go, because you're going to go into it with this really, really false expectation, especially if it's your first exposure to QA. Because I can guarantee you, whatever you learned in that boot camp will not be what you see when you hit the real world. Like that, it's just not.